Hello gamers, Power Word Heal here, and today we're going to be talking about how to heal Vaelastrasz the Corrupt in Blackwing Lair. So this is a boss that's kind of always been a bit of a thorn in people's sides, even all the way back to 2004. This boss was known as like a guild killer, right? Because a lot of guilds actually did break up in this boss. It was considered quite hard back in the day. And even in 2019, I saw some issues with some guilds. It's often common to lose people in, at least middling tier guilds in this boss, especially. And, even when you go higher, sometimes you see some mistakes in that. And then in 2025, I've kind of seen the same thing recently. I've seen people complain on Reddit about the boss. I've had pugs that have had trouble dealing with the boss, right? Even guild runs have not really been super clean. So I kind of wanted to take a moment and talk about it from a healing perspective, because I think that's one of the two common failure points in this boss. There's two main ways you can fail it, right? And the first way is a threat perspective, where people are ripping threat at the wrong time, and that can be really devastating, right? And that's probably one of the more common ones, but it's also a really easy to fix problem, I feel for the most part, right? And people tend to, I feel not get stuck on the boss due to threat issues, because what happens is normally after you've wiped to threat issues a couple of times, people kind of get the message, right? They're sick of spending consumes. They don't want to waste, any more gold, so they're ready to kind of just humble themselves and play properly a little bit, right? Not get overeager. But when I see people repeatedly wiping on the boss and struggle to kill it, or just take quite a few wipes every week to kill it, I feel typically that's a healing problem. And I wanted to kind of go in and break down what I think is the problem and what are the solutions, right? And it mainly hinges around the debuff that the boss gives you, Burning Adrenaline, right? So there's kind of two debuffs, so we'll talk about it just to differentiate so you're not confused. So the first debuff is Essence of the Red. Now everybody gets that, and that gives you a ton of resource, basically, just an infinite amount of mana, infinite amount of energy, just keeps regenerating, right? Rage, same thing. And then Burning Adrenaline is a buff that basically reduces your max health total over time, right? It keeps going. And then it also makes your cast instant, basically. Now you still have the GCD, I think. So it's not, I'm not sure if it really influences the GCD at all. It might make it a little bit quicker. I'm not entirely sure, but basically your casts and your actions are going to be instant. So I think that how this works is the tank, the first person who aggroes him and gets threat on him, gets Burning Adrenaline, right? And then the subsequent casts of it go on to just random raid members, right? And I'm not sure if it's only casters or if it tends to be casters and healers, but that's basically how the breakdown of the buff goes, right? And that's going to be essential to killing this boss if you happen to get it on a healer, because if you get it on a healer, you can carry this fight super easily. Now we're going to talk about what happens if a healer doesn't get it, but I see healers getting this buff way too often and just squandering it, and that is hurting the people who are wiping on this boss repeatedly, right? Because on any number of those attempts, you have so many healers in your raid that it's not completely rare for a healer to get it. So when a healer does get it, you want to be able to maximize that, and you can kind of carry the whole thing, if that makes sense. So obviously what it does is it makes sure your cast instant, right? Which is huge, because as a healer, your max rank heal on pretty much every class, max rank greater heal, max rank healing wave, max rank healing touch, these all do, max rank holy light, these all do an incredible amount of healing, right? And a lot of times they're just limited by the fact that they have a long cast time, right? They cost a lot of mana. Those restrictions are basically completely removed on Veil when you both have Essence of the Red, which you will have, and you have Burning Adrenaline. And the biggest thing you can do, to help your raid succeed when you have those, is to basically hard focus the tank in most cases. Now, what is most cases? Well, there may be some particular cases where the healing in your raid is so weak, right, that the raid healing is actually a problem. I feel this tends to not be the case. I feel most of the time, the tank healing tends to be a problem, especially because people are consuming on this boss a lot of the times. but it may be that people are kind of skimping out on greater fire protection potions and stuff of that nature because they've just gotten so expensive, right? So as you scale back on those things, obviously more raid damage goes out and stuff like that, right? Because before in 2019, people would pop a fire pot at the start, right? And then you would have the pot up during the fight, so you would basically be mitigating like 6 to 7k fire damage just from your potions, right? And then if you have priests pre-shielding on top of that, that's a whole nother layer of protection, right? So you actually had like a lot of defense against the burning, ticking fire debuff that goes on everybody. That might not be the case anymore. So in cases where, you need to heal the raid, you need to heal the raid. But realistically, what you want to do as a healer with burning adrenaline is you want to be healing the tank in most cases, especially when that's the problem point. So typically how the raid is set up, right, is you'll have the boss in the middle. These are the pillars, right? The tank is towards like the front here, and then the melee DPS are on this side of the boss. Now, your ranged will basically be, like, we'll put them as green, right? A lot of times they just kind of like clump up somewhere in the middle here, right? And the idea is they're far enough away from the boss so they don't get tail swiped or they don't get breathed on in the front, and they don't get hit by the cleave, because the cleave actually chains on this boss. So if somebody is like right here, for example, it's very bad, because if the cleave hits them, it just chains to everybody in the raid, which is obviously very not good, right? So we don't want that. But the problem is this positioning can be a little bit weird for the debuff, right? Because typically what I've seen guilds do in like a lot of the pugs I've been in and stuff is they'll tell people, if you get the buff, kind of run out of the raid and then do as much damage as possible and die. And so typically they'll tell them like head in this direction towards the back pillar, right? And this isn't really bad if you are a damage dealer, right? Because you only need to hit the boss. You can hit the boss from anywhere, basically, right? So especially like if you come over next to this pillar, right, you plant right here, and then some healers are maybe healing you, right? And you're unloading on the boss and kill him, and do as much damage as you can. That's perfect, right? The real problem comes in, though, when you're a healer, because sometimes, depending on the positioning and stuff like that and where you think you should be running, you might run a bit too far. For example, if you are here, right, as a healer, you can probably still hit the tank. But if you run like here or you run here, you're probably out of line of sight of the tank. At this point, you're probably getting hit by the tail, right? So your positioning is kind of important. And I think the thing is, when healers get the debuff, some people actually see that as like a downside. Like I've heard people refer to that as like, oh, we got griefed because the healer got burning adrenaline. We lost one of our tank healers, because they had to run away. And it's like, no. You want to be using this to kill the boss, right? It's actually more effective, in my opinion, to get a healer with the buff than to get a caster with it, because they can really keep the tank like super topped, right? So basically what you want to do as a healer is you need to be enraged at the tank. Now, how you accomplish that kind of depends on your raid. And if if you're involved in the raid, right? Like if you have a position of authority in the guild or something like that. Hold on, I don't want to delete all this. Delete some of it. Okay. Yeah, so if you have like a position of authority in the guild, you can maybe try and make some positional suggestions here. Like my personal opinion is I think that the healers and stuff should be kind of like more towards this side where they can still hit everybody, but like further over here, and then you give the burning adrenaline healer like as much space towards this side as possible without getting hit by the breath, right? If we put the cone here, I don't know exactly how he's going to be positioned, but if that's like the breath radius, which sometimes it's kind of more like this, so you have to be careful. But yeah, if this is like the breath radius, then you kind of want to be as close as you can be without getting hit by the breath, without getting hit by the cleave, and as far away from the rest of your raid as possible. And you want to be pumping heals onto the tank. Now, what do you cast on the tank? So you basically just cast your max rank, like single target heal. And the cool thing about this is you can just spam it if you want. Like if you're just really kind of scared, you're panicked, a little bit frazzled that you have the buff, just standing here and spamming the biggest heal you have on the tank is probably going to be good enough. But the best way you can do it really is you stand here and you can actually wait for him to take damage, right? Because you have basically an instant heal. It's like you have like a Nature's Swiftness healing touch that's on, it's on at your fingertips every time. So you basically just wait for him to get hit. You don't have to wait for him to get low. Just wait for him to get hit once, right? So your heal's guaranteed getting value, and then just, bam, hit the heal, right? Then, by the time he hits again, you're probably going to be off GCD, right? And just do it again, and just do it again, and just do it again. And your job is just to babysit that tank to make sure he doesn't die. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind is that as all this is happening, right, your max health is lowering, and you're still taking damage. Now, other people are probably going to be healing you. However, at a certain point, you actually get very low max health, okay? So if people aren't healing you for like a second or two in the late stages of this buff, you can die very quickly. So what you do there, right, is when you notice yourself starting to get low, is you just alternate heals on yourself and then the tank. So you heal this tank to full, heal yourself to full, heal the tank to full, heal yourself to full, right? And there may even come a point where you don't even have time to do that anymore. And you kind of just heal yourself, like only basically. Like you're healing yourself, you move away during the GCD where the heal's down, and you heal yourself again when it's up, right? And that's how you kind of like trickle your way even further away from the group to make sure that you don't hit anybody. And I think personally that it's so important to maximize this buff and how it's used that even if my raid was in positioned incorrectly, right? So let's say that we'll remove these, right? And let's say that they're in a very like loose clump here, right? And there's really not a good way or a good place for you to be, because if you're here where you can still hit the tank, maybe you're still in range of some of them. If you're here where you can still hit the tank, maybe you're in range of some of them, right? I actually don't even care. I would just get there and just be confident in yourself, right? That you're going to heal the tank and you're going to watch your own health. Just watch his health, watch your health, watch, right? And then once you start to get really low, right? Like really, really low, like where you're basically having to alternate casts on him and then you, at that point, that's when you start moving, right? And if you're over here, you just move more towards this direction, right? And if you're over here, you move more kind of towards here, just away from the main crowd. And like I said, if it gets to the point where you have to like be healing yourself constantly to live, it's still okay, because you can cast a heal on yourself when the GCD's like ticking, right? You just move a little bit, then you cast another one immediately, and you have like instant cast heals, right? So you can do that on the move basically. So you can just like move out while you're casting on yourself in either direction. Okay, but you really want to play this buff to like the margins, because it's going to allow you to really keep your tank alive for a long time. Now, obviously, these bosses can hit very hard, right? A lot of the tanks that are tanking them are not tanking them in full mid gear because they're trying to get threat, right? Especially on horde side. So it is possible, like once your tank kind of gets below a certain value, there are things that can happen where he just gets gibbed, right? And even if you have the burning adrenaline and you're doing exactly what I'm talking about, it's still possible for him to die, right? So there are, circumstances where there's just nothing you can do about that. But for the most part, you can do a pretty good job mitigating his deaths, because a lot of times he's not going to get like actually one shot. He's going to get chunked really hard and then a follow-up hit right after. So you having the instant cast basically helps put him back to 100% as soon as the first hit goes out. And that's really, really helpful, obviously, right? And just in terms of making sure he doesn't die. So, yeah, you have to really try and take advantage of this buff. If you're a healer, don't shy away from it. Don't just run to the back and heal the raid, right? Definitely try and use this on your tank if you guys are struggling to keep the tank up, because it's by far the best method. Because otherwise, it kind of just starts to rely on, like, you probably have like 4 priests in a raid on horde, and that's pretty good at keeping the tank up, but not necessarily perfect. Some people might not always be healing the tank if they have an assign on it. So the best thing you can do to 100% make sure your raid succeeds when you have the buff is to just spam the tank and play it to like the max possible, right? So that's basically how you handle the buff as a healer. And again, it's max rank healing touch, max rank healing wave, max rank holy light, and max rank greater heal. Now, obviously, like I said, we're going to go into the individual classes now, right? So we'll talk about other ways you can use the buff sometimes too if the tank healing is not a problem. But we're going to start with Priest. So what I like to do on Priest is before the fight even starts, right? If you have DBM, you can kind of see the timer, or if you don't, somebody else can basically tell you when like you're 30 seconds out, 25 seconds out, or whatever, right? And you basically just start shielding people. And you don't even have to do the thing where you drink in between the shield, but you can still, right? But you're going to get all your mana back anyway. So you're just putting a bunch of pre-shields out on basically like everybody, right? And the idea there is it's just saving their fire pot because the fire damage goes to the shield before the fire pot. And if they don't have a fire pot, then obviously it's just saving their HP, right? But either way, it's just a solid way to kind of start the fight. And then usually what I do on Priest is you just spam max rank flash, right? And at the start, there's not going to be a lot of people who are going to be taking damage, most likely. So what I tend to do, and that's because of your shields, because of the fire potion, right? Some people may resist early ticks, or there may not be necessarily enough missing health yet for Flash Shield to get its full value. So in cases like that, you're basically alternating casting shields and Flash Heal, right? So you're casting a shield, okay? That's guaranteed to get full value is the idea. And then you're casting Flash Heal in between those shields, right? Maybe you weave like 2 of them in, then it's time to cast another shield, etc., right? And you just keep going like that. Now, you may want to have one priest that isn't doing this, right? Because you want to have one priest at least that always has shield cooldown up for the tank. Okay, so you probably want to have somebody, like, just designate somebody to do that. That way the rest of the priests are kind of free to use their shield to, cast on anybody that they see fit, right? If they're not tank healing, right? If they are doing raid healing, they can do that. And yeah, I think that's the best way to tackle this fight as a priest. I see a lot of people talk about using Renew on this fight. Definitely not early, in my opinion, in the fight, because they're just not... there just tends to not be enough to heal, right? And it kind of depends a little bit on if you have... Like a lot of guilds are at least going to have, 5 to 6 shamans, right? And sometimes you'll have extra priests. So if you're an extra priest and you're on raid healing, the problem you have on horde side is that chain heal is probably destroying your renew, because shamans are going to be using chain heal a lot, obviously on the melee and the range during this fight. So, at that point, you're basically... What you should do is you should pick the targets that aren't getting chain healed and heal them with flash... Flash heal, right? So that's basically how I would heal this as a priest. Now, if you have a tank assign, you're kind of just you're spamming the tank, right? Now, there's an art to spamming the tank, kind of, where, you can just full-on spam the tank. But you do want to try and line up your healing to coincide with auto attacks as much as possible. It's kind of like you can kind of get a feel for when the damage has gone out, right? And then also there's things like the breath, right? So the breath is on a timer. You can see it being cast. So obviously having your heals land when the breath hits, like for any dragon, is something you really want to be doing in this game, especially because a lot of deaths, I feel like, tend to happen from a breath into melee hits afterward. So if you can have the heals line up as soon as the breath comes through, that's really, really strong, right? So even though you have full mana, it's not necessarily about you trying to save mana here because you have full mana, right? But you're just trying to make sure that your heals are healing at a time where they have a chance to be more relevant, right? Like, you don't want to just be sending a full flash heal into the tank after he's, just taken a hit but has just been popped up. He's, you know what I mean? Like, you don't want to be just wasting casts because you want them to kind of try and line up with the damage when possible. But you obviously are going to be casting a lot on the tank here, and you don't really have to worry about overhealing. Like, my point is you just want it to be close, right? If it looks like it's going to be close, you just send it, and somebody's heal is going to hit at the right point, right? If everybody's kind of trying to do that. So that's kind of like the idea when you're tank healing on the priest. Then move on to the shaman, right? As a shaman, you're probably just going to be spamming chain heal. Now, there may be cases where, you have too many shaman, right? And not enough priest or something like that. And in that case, I would just use max rank lesser healing wave and basically do the same thing where you're trying to spam it on the tank, right? Other than that, though, just use chain heal. If you're a shaman and you get the buff, Burning Adrenaline, right, and the tank healing is under control, then obviously feel free to use that on chain heal. It's really strong. But again, if you think the tank healing is even like a little bit suspect, or you want to make sure that no matter no circumstances, does your group wipe here, right, then you basically transition to max rank healing wave, and you just spam the tank with it. So that's how I'd play shaman on this fight. Druid is interesting. So I think Druid is one of the classes where if you don't have the buff on Druid, you really want Druid to be raid healing, actually. Right? Now, you can put hots on the tank, but what you want to do is you want to have the Druid use regrowth, and you basically just you're just using regrowth on like every target. You actually want to be the regrowth spec as well, right? So I actually have a regrowth spec swap to Veil that I used to swap to on Veil. And that regrowth spec also has the 5 out of 5 talent to reduce pushback, right? Because you are getting spell pushback from the damage that you take. So on Veil, I just I regrowth everybody in the raid. I'm on raid heals on Druid. It's like super effective. You're probably going to be like the highest HPS on this fight by a lot in most cases. Like, obviously it sort of depends on the circumstances, but especially if like you're the only Druid or something, like, yeah, you're going to be doing crazy HPS in this fight. Regrowth is really amazing because it puts back, it's basically like a flash heal, right? That puts back the missing health, and it puts it back at a very high clip, because if you're using max rank and it has 50% base crit if you're using the right spec, and then it has like about 30% extra crit from world buffs and a little bit more from just like your intellect and crit on gear. So you're probably like 80 to 85% crit, right? Which means that you can just, you're probably more like 80% crit actually, right? And yeah, you can just basically send it on the boss, and you're critting more often than not. And when you crit, you have Nature's Grace, so it actually gets reduced to a 1.5 second cooldown. And then if you have the tier 2 5 set, it goes to like a 1.3 second cooldown. So you're casting faster than a flash heal, a heal that's going to be healing more than a max rank flash in most cases, because it's going to be critting almost all the time. And on top of that, it puts a huge like regrowth. Not huge, but it puts a pretty substantial hot, which kind of balances out the ticking damage as you go forward. And this is especially more effective later in the fight, right? Once people's pots and shields and everything like that have run out. So Druid is like super effective on this fight, and unless you get the buff, I definitely suggest you just spam regrowth. Now, if you get the buff and you still need raid heals, right? If that's still the point you're struggling on, then regrowth is still excellent, right? Because it does, it's kind of like doing the same thing. Healing Touch can also be fantastic. It just does a lot more in terms of like the raw base value of the heal. But again, like if I had the buff on Druid, I would probably just babysit the tank until the fight's over, right? Just to ensure that we get the kill. But if you don't have the buff, use regrowth. So Paladin is next, right? And Paladin on this fight, I would basically use Holy Light. Now, personally, when I heal this fight on Paladin, let's say I don't have the buff, I still use Holy Light, even in those situations on the tank. I don't think it's necessarily wrong to use your Flash of Light necessarily, but I think at least if you're going to have some Paladins use Flash of Light, you want to have a mix, right? Where you have some using the Flash of Light, maybe like if you have 4 of them, maybe 3 using Flash of Light, 1 using Holy Light, or 2 using Holy Light, 2 using Flash of Light. But I just personally like timing the Holy Light on the tank, like just, spamming it on the tank kind of. And realistically, you don't even really need to time it that well, like I was saying earlier with the Priest. You just have to make sure that it's kind of close to when damage is coming in. And if you're all trying to do that, you're going to basically hit when the guy has taken damage, and you should be absolutely fine. The reason why I kind of stay away from Flash of Light is because it's just a little bit of a weak heal for this, right? Max rank Flash just has a little bit more punch to it. Not to mention both Lesser Healing Wave and Max rank Flash, they apply the buff to the tank, right? Where on crits, it increases their armor. Now, all the heals do that, I believe, or at least most of the normal ones, but obviously you're going to have a better chance of stacking that quickly and keeping it up if you use the faster heals, right? And Paladin doesn't really have that applying on their flash heal, so there's not as much of a need to use that. So, yeah, on Paladin, I pretty much just stick to Holy Light, and that usually gets me through all the time. So I think that's basically all the classes, right? And yeah, I think that's basically all the information you need. If you have any questions or anything like that, if you're having specific problems, feel free to talk to me in the comments. I'll do my best to help you guys out, because I know this is a pain point for a lot of guilds. We could even do like log reviews on it or something like that. But I think really just utilizing the healer that gets the Burning Adrenaline buff properly is super important for a lot of guilds to killing this fight. And like, if you're the type of guild that, like, let's say the raid just really isn't that great overall, right? But you're willing to pull the boss like 5 times a night at least, right? Usually during those 5 pulls, you'll at least have a healer get Burning Adrenaline, right, during like one of those 5, and that can kind of be the one that helps carry you home if you guys are really, really struggling, right? I don't think it should be necessary. Obviously, the healer gets Burning Adrenaline. It's not, but that is just it could be the reality in some cases where some guilds just really aren't performing that well, and the massive healing advantage of Burning Adrenaline really helps to carry them over the edge. So if you just do enough attempts to actually get the boss to put it on your healer, right, then that can really help and keep your tank alive, because the whole name of this fight is to keep the tanks alive as long as possible. The sketchiest part is the transitions, right? Which means that as many transitions as you can avoid, the better. So keeping the original tank up for longer is the ideal case, right? And to add on to that, one final thing, make sure your tank is like using his cooldowns, and especially if you have like a pull that's going well, right? Don't be afraid to have the tank like Shield Wall, Last Stand, things like that, right? I know Shield Wall has a bit of a cooldown. So the idea is, like, if you get a pull where things don't completely disintegrate within the first 5 or 10 seconds, and the pull's really going good, it's looking like a promising pull, that's where you have him drop something like Shield Wall once he starts to get a bit low, once he sees his max health coming down, right? Because 75% damage reduction really helps, especially when his max health is like plummeting, right? Last Stand obviously helps to counteract the max health plummet, and then with both of those things together combined, it even gives the raid sometimes a bit more time to catch up on the raid itself if raid heals are lacking as well, right? And typically what'll happen is that the raid heals being the problem, that catches up with you later than the tank, right? So the idea is, like, if you can keep the tank alive for quite a bit, right, and then he Shield Wall's Last Stands, then you can kind of catch back up a little bit on the lower raid members, and you only have to have a couple people actually healing the tank during those cooldowns, because they're just very, very powerful. So just a couple notes to keep in mind there. And one last thing, if you do get the buff, just remember to keep yourself alive. Like I said, you just alternate casts on the tank and you once you start to get really low. Once you get really, really low, you're just casting on yourself and moving out of the raid. And then you just really want to be careful that you're not in the breath cone here distance, right? And you're not in the cleave, because if you even get touched by anything when you've had Burning Adrenaline on you for a while, right, and your max health is really low, you're just going to die. Like, if you get hit by a cleave when you've had it on you for like 15 plus seconds, very good chance of dying. You get hit by a breath, extremely good chance of dying. So just try and always be aware of those things, and just don't get popped by some random mechanic, right? So yeah, even the tail can actually kill you, I believe, because it does damage and not just knock you back. So if you're really low and you're like over here or something, you can kind of get knocked back and just die and splat, and sometimes you get knocked into people and even explode them. So just be very careful of the tail as well. Be careful of the cleave, and be careful of the breath. And yeah, you guys should be fine. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this helped. And just if this helped you, feel free to like, comment, subscribe. And I will see you guys next time.